Welcome to Bridgetown Church of Christ. We're glad you're here. You may be joining us in person or online. In person is an awesome option because it allows you to be with others and to serve others. Online is a solid option because there are times you just can't come to a building. You can still connect with your church family. No matter the format, we believe that God wants to speak to you. At BCC, we not only value you as an adult, but we value your children as well. On Sundays, during our in-person service, we offer programming in Bridgetown Kids for children birth through 5th grade. Each Sunday, children will worship, they'll sing, they'll play games, they'll meet and make new friends, and they'll learn a story from the Bible in a fun and interactive and age-appropriate way. Our children's ministry space is bright, it's colorful, it's clean, and it is staffed by trained and background-checked volunteers. If you haven't brought your children to BCC, we really hope that you'll do so soon. We also want to invite your teenage students to join us in person. If you have students in 6th through 12th grade, they will head off to the Bridgetown Church Student Ministry space where they will play games and receive dynamic teaching that applies directly to their lives before rejoining the adults for worship, for the singing, and for community life. Every Sunday, adults and youth and children will hear the good news about Jesus. They will learn that there is a community of people who love them and who care about them. And then we're all sent out to spread the love of Jesus to people around us. But here at BCC, we don't want to just send you out once a week empty-handed. We exist to love our community and invite them into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And one of the primary ways that we can help you and really help our church to accomplish its vision is to equip you and your family with tools so that you can talk about God and you can talk about Jesus inside of your home, no matter what stage your family is in. So every Sunday, we publish 3 different family worship videos for you to use throughout the week. Each of these videos will give you a taste or a refresher of what's being discussed in Bridgetown Kids, in BCSM, or in the adult service. And each of the videos ends with some questions and some Bible reading so that you can talk about God inside of your home. We encourage you to check these out by visiting our church website. As for now, it's time to get things started.
Let's all stand together and worship.
Worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, He parted the raging seas. My God, He holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes the way. Oh, He hung up on that cross and He rose up from that grave. Our God's still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. And we were the prisoners, but now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise.
Good morning, Bridgetown. My name is John Russell. I'm filling in today for Nathan, so if you came to hear him, I'm sorry for you. He will be back in a couple of weeks. And he asked me if I would to stay with this series about some Old Testament heroes and amazing tales. I'm going to talk about Joshua in just a little bit. Before I start, I just want to say I have a great tie to Bridgetown. In 1962 or 63, my brother Bob was the first youth minister here. And he was also the part-time janitor of the building. I guess it's his old building is this way. And so I had association beginning then. Later on, I was youth minister, and Bob Mink was the young man in the church, and he became youth minister here. I became good friends with the Bennett family, Bob Bennett, Dr. Bennett. Later became my associate at Lakeside Christian Church. I served Lakeside from 1970 to 2010, so 40 years. They put up with Moses. They thought it was time for me to go as well, and so I was gone. But the Geiger family, the Wetzer family, Jeannie Moran is here today from that family, and there's others and I've been associated over the years, but none more closely than the May family. And Jeff May has been a member of the church where I was serving for a number of years. Now he serves as basically runs my website and does a number of setting up, scheduling, and things like that. So I have a great association, a great love for Bridgetown. Thank you for inviting me. Let me come back these 2 weeks while Nathan is gone. Let me talk to you about the first chapter of Joshua, our hero that we're going to talk about. Years ago, there was an ancient practice in the Congo. When a mother lost a young child, immediately the community got together and they built a little hut at the edge of the community, and there they put enough food for 30 days for her to go and live and to grieve. At the end of 30 days, they would set the little lean-to on fire, and she had to make a choice whether she would stay and die in her grief or get up and go on and believing that it was time to move forward. Now, you're right, it is crude. Nobody can measure grief. Those of you who have had grief experience know that it can come in waves and suddenly it can catch you at a time. But there is, again, a reminder for all of us that life moves forward, never backward. And we all need to understand that's the direction in which it's going to go. But sometimes it's hard to get moving again, isn't it? Because sometimes I think that's why Joshua is so good as an example for us about getting moving again. And I hope you'll become familiar with him in these 2 weeks, because he has a great deal to teach us, and I'm only going to touch on a couple of those. Because as the book opens, God speaks to Joshua in that Old Testament book, and this is the first thing he says. Listen to this. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm going to give them. Now think about that. Moses was gone. That was an unbelievable tragedy to those people. They had to face and come to terms with that Moses no longer was going to be their leader as he had been for 40 years. He had been their George Washington. He had been a strong hand that was going to lead them into freedom. And then somehow in that period when they were in the wilderness, he had forged them into a nation under the rulership of God. And they had leaned really heavily on Moses. In fact, they had not known any other leader at all. So every moment of difficulty, they turned to what Moses would have to say. They wanted his strong leadership. And now this new day was opening, and his leadership was gone. What are we going to do, the people wondered. And here comes God with this very blunt voice. Moses is dead. Now get up and move across the Jordan. Now listen to me. God wasn't being cruel. He was being, as he always is, protective and pragmatic. This is why I think the Bible is such a helpful and wonderful book, because of all the parallels it has to many current events in which all of us in this generation have to experience and undergo. Those of you who are old enough to remember, or those of you who are young can at least remember seeing pictures when the news came out of Dallas, Texas in November of 1963 that the young American president had been assassinated. Do you remember that picture that showed us the airplane coming back carrying his widow, but she was standing there in her blood-stained dress next to the vice president, who had his left hand on a Bible and his right hand raised. And people were saying, that's so cruel that she had to experience that or to see that. But the point is, that's the way life is, isn't it? It may be a difficult time in your emotions, but it must go on. The last verse, or the next to last verse of the preceding book of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, had this eulogy. It said this: no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of Israel. But that was a fact that needed to be faced. Moses is not coming back. We need to get up and go forward across Jordan. The reason this is so applicable is because there are two things here that are eventually shown to us that are always going to be here, and truthfully, almost each of them is unpleasant. The first is change. Every age is an age of change and transition. There's something old that has died and something that's being born. Now, let's be honest, ours is a time of accelerated change, isn't it? You know, they may tell you that your 6-month-old computer is now antiquated. You need to get rid of it. How quickly things pass. We don't even notice when some transitions are going. I mean, how many of you have gone to a funeral visitation and stand in line, and suddenly you look around and you realize every single person in line is looking at their cell phone and texting or doing something? Now, young people would say, so what's the difference? Well, that's a new phenomenon that has now been part of our culture and of which we are now a part. But that's the direction life is always going. Our bodies change every day. And if you don't think so, just look at some old Christmas photographs from 10 years ago, and you'll be able to see that cells of our body are no longer no sooner built into tissues than they begin to dissolve and die and make room for new material. And our minds change too. How many of us have looked back at things we used to have as opinions yesterday and now we laugh at? Our homes change. We move the high chairs to the attic or we give them to the Goodwill. And sometimes we have to go back and get them again because a surprise has occurred. Or the kids go off to college and another chair is pulled back from the table against the wall. And there's so many things that happen that we think are always going to be here, and they're not. Now, saying that, there are some things that need to be fixed. Indeed, I think we as a culture have messed up our life by, instead of understanding that some things need to remain and never change, we've let them go as well. I mean, how many times have we heard sociologists tell us, oh, marriage and family is no longer really necessary. Fidelity is a thing of the past. It's dead. We need to live in an enlightened age and just forget those things. How's that working out for us, huh? Now, the other entity that's here and always will be here, along with change, is crisis. Somebody has defined crisis as nothing more than change accelerated and speeded up. I mean, your life goes smoothly for a while, and all of a sudden, like an action of a slow motion picture, suddenly everything gets speeded up, and forces that were building for a long time come to a climax in rapid succession, and the crisis is there, and our emotions are jolted, and we are wrenched from a dislocation to an upheaval that is difficult to face. And something like that has happened. An earthquake has occurred to shake our foundations, and things that we had trusted and took for granted now are no longer there. I can't count the number of times I've seen the stunned look on the faces of people who I love, who suddenly are faced with a crisis. They're sitting in a courtroom and they're listening to a stranger in dark robes pronounce that their child is going to go to jail. Or the doctor is talking to them in a private little waiting room off to the side, but his words are not sinking in. And there is this quiet murmuring that's going on within them that's saying, I can't believe this is happening to me. And it's hard for us to look at change and crisis as anything but unpleasant, but really those times represent growth opportunities because the loving and never-changing God is asking something new of us and is moving our inclinations into situations where we must grow up and go on or go under. There were people in Joshua's day, they didn't like the fact that Moses was gone. But they were part of a movement. God was going to lead them out into a greater nation. I mean, the only contribution their ancestors had made is to stand around and grumble against all the hardships and sigh about the good old days of the past that would never come back again. It's part of human nature to not recognize how creative and meaningful change can be when we're standing in them. I mean, think of the people in the American Revolution. They didn't look upon that as really being exciting, perhaps, but a great change was occurring. Or people in the Reformation or Restoration movements, they looked and they saw nothing but calamity and breakup. They had their hands on the most dynamic moments of all of history in every generation when freedom is being hammered out on the anvil of human hardship, and they just couldn't see anything but hard times. One historian wrote that the most likely place to find opportunity is smack in the middle of trouble. Not in the smooth, easy days, but in times of crisis when all things seem to be upset, but we've got to move. Joshua's moment opens in a moment of crisis. Moses is dead, God said. Now, get up and move across Jordan. The Lord continues, and he says this to him. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I'll be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Boy, I think there's a projection there for the church in this day and age, isn't there? A whole generation had died in the wilderness with a promise that God wanted Joshua to now be the leader, to see it through and to go on. John Wesley years and years ago said, God buries his workmen, but his work always goes on. For Joshua, Moses was dead, but God's purpose was very much alive. Things change. The church changes. But God's purpose remains. There's not a time for standing around and stopping. It's a time to go forward and move. Somebody said when God fashioned humans, He put their eyes in front because that's the direction He wanted them most focused. Now, we shouldn't ignore what has happened in the past. That would be stupid and that would be foolish. And sadly, many movements and nations do not pay close enough attention to what has happened in the past, and they begin to repeat them. But hear me this, we cannot reshape the past. There are no tools available to accomplish that, are there? But God is always saying to the church, get up, move forward, go on. You can make a difference. Dr. John Claypool told about a severe thunderstorm that swept through the southern Kentucky farm in which he had grown up and his forebears had lived in for 6 generations. In the orchard, he said, there was a wind that blew over an old pear tree that had been there as long as anybody could remember. Claypool says his grandfather was grieved to lose the tree because he had climbed that tree as a boy and had enjoyed the fruit all of his life. A neighbor came by and said, Doc, I'm really sorry to hear about your pear tree being blown down. Me too, said the grandfather. It was really a part of my past. Well, the neighbor said, what are you going to do? Claypool said, my grandfather paused for a moment and then said, I'm going to pick the fruit and then burn what's left. Starting again can be hard. Some of you could stand and testify because you said goodbye to some people who were very important to you, or situations, or a job, or a circumstance. It can at the same time give you ready-made excuses because, well, that voice is gone, or that opportunity, that job is not here. But listen to me, that's the beginning of the book, not the end. Personnel changes, but promises are constant. Now let me apply this to Bridgetown in this hour. God's kingdom here on earth told us to be always constantly looking across the river to the next life, to the next world. This is merely the prelude. That's the main event. We get those mixed up, don't we? Now, what is it we apply? There's a couple things I want you to apply. Number one, I think you need to live in confidence. He said, no one's going to be able to stand against you all of your life. As I was with Moses, I'll be with you. I'll never leave you, never forsake you. You know what? You've heard that before because that's a microcosm of what Jesus promised the disciples and his followers in the church in this hour too. In the midst of all the whirling changes that we see in our culture, it's important to remember that the church, God will always be with us. We need to be people who are mobilizing for the world, choosing to step out of our personal comfort zones and to lead the world rather than to react to the world's changes. Secondly, to live in opportunity. To see the disruptions that you are experiencing, to let the truth of the gospel come alive for you. I mean, how many times have we heard people in this day and age label the church as an outdated institution? It's incapable of adequately addressing the needs of this time. But what an opportunity to take the timeless message to a world that is so difficult to understand, but using the modern methods and this hour that we can give people the opportunity to understand there's a promised land that we're all going to be going toward. I don't know where all this marvelous technology is going to take us. But it's a different hour than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it's foolish for the church to neglect that. So I think we need to understand all the things that are Twitter and Kindle and all that they portray in the truth of Moses and Joshua to be applicable to this time and this place. Somebody once said, one of the stickiest impediments of every ongoing purpose of God in each age is people who live with their bodies in this age, but their minds back in another. And they try to face the problems of today with the habits of yesterday. When we need to bring the fresh bread of Christ to fulfilling every generation, But just don't limit it to the packaging of another moment. A few days ago, I decided to have some Wheaties, the breakfast of champions. You remember that cereal? A lot of you grew up with that. I did too. It was always a staple. You know what? When I was a boy growing up and Wheaties was there, Mickey Mantle was on the front and Willie Mays was on the cover. Now there's LeBron James and there's Steph Curry. Because times change, right? But the ingredients inside are still the same. The packaging is different, but the nourishment is still the same. I think it's important for us to understand the powerful illumination tools of today can be used to give the ancient message a real fresh view. To also live in urgency. It's time to get moving now. Not just talk about it. Now's the hour you're going to occupy the land, Joshua. You need to go now rather than just having another committee meeting and just deciding, we're going to do this now. And to live in victory. You know what? If I read the Old Testament correctly, when you do go through the book of Joshua, you'll discover that God didn't clean out all the enemies of the land before he told them to go and possess it. It was inhabited by some pretty strong forces. It was not going to be free of conflict. They're going to have to battle their way through the entire time. That had deterred their predecessors. The inhabitants seemed like giants to them. They said, we can't do anything about it. We're like grasshoppers in their sight, they said. We better not go. It's sure defeat. Paul reminds the church today, we wrestle not against powers in this dark world, but spiritual forces and rulers and authorities in the heavenly realm. So be sure you go to battle, be sure to put on the full armor of God, because when the day of evil comes, you'll be able to stand your ground. God's going to be with us, but we're going to have to be prepared to fight. And don't make any mistake, the enemy is pretty strong. Sin is always going to be extremely difficult to overcome. But victory is promised to those who trust. Now, I know it's always easy to lose your courage in the midst of all this. It's like we say, it's just too hard. It costs too much. It's a bridge too far. But there's one attribute that God desperately wanted those people to have that I think he also wants us to be imbued with, that it's applicable to us. Listen. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Why does God speak so repetitively about the necessity of courage? It's because of the fact that it's not always present, is it? We don't always show that. We can be paralyzed. Satan can present himself as a lion ready to pounce upon us and perpetually make us live in what I call the what-if category. What if this happens? Or what if that occurs? Or what if that? I believe God wants us to be prudent, but I also believe he wants us to have what I call holy boldness. Holy boldness is exercising a trust in God when the particulars don't seem to point that way. Holy boldness is stepping into the Jordan when everything within you seems to be saying, don't do it, don't do it. Holy boldness doesn't mean you're not afraid. Holy boldness is being afraid and going ahead anyway because you know it's right to be obedient, and it's more important to be obedient than it is to be comfortable. Holy boldness is risking the chance to be ridiculed and to be labeled as an ignorant, alarmist, or a relic of the past because you believe there are standards worth the risk to hold on to. Holy boldness is coming to the conclusion that you're tired of being dictated to by your fear and you want to walk more in your faith. Moses was dead, but God isn't. And the past is behind you, but the God of history is always going to be before you. As I said earlier, some of you listening to this have taken this personally, and it's not Moses' grave, but another grave that you stood by, and it seems as if that 3-foot by 6-foot hole has covered your whole world. And you're wondering now about Jordan. Listen to me. This is God's message to you as well as to the church. Be strong. Be of good courage. I will never forsake you. So listen one last time. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord will be with you wherever you go. And then he gives us specific commands. Be careful to obey all the law that my servant Moses gave to you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let the book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night so that you will be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. His promise is there and includes this one last antidote to discouragement. Several things to avoid, he said, just in that verse. Number one, don't be distracted by the past. The past can be restrictive rather than reassuring. It can be a hindrance rather than a help. Please learn the lessons of your past, but don't be stymied by its beauty or your memories. 2, don't be deaf to his promptings. Listen as you pray as well as request. For I don't think that God is silent. His word declares his will. His people encourage. His spirit inhabits all things that he promised us, and we need to hear. 3rd, don't doubt his promises. Too many times we take little finite snapshots when there is a grander and higher picture that we need to pay attention to. I'm reminded of the father who bought his young son, a very powerful telescope. And the boy was fascinated with the mechanism. Immediately he began to tear it apart and to put it back together. Every day he'd wake, he'd tear it apart and put it back together, examine each piece, excuse me, and be able to repeat to shine separate pieces back together. He knew the inner workings, but he never saw the bigger picture of what the telescope offered. Pardon me. In all of our Bible studies and small groups in the church, I'm glad we have those. But please never let it dim the promise that God is always with us and will never forsake, and he's preparing a future for us. So get up, move across your Jordan, trusting he will go with you. And one last thing, don't dismiss his commands. Don't deviate, he said. There's a purpose behind every command and a reason behind every requirement that God has given. And that reason is this: to make your life richer and better. Do what I've said, and in that faithfulness, you will be successful wherever you go. When God promises, his presence is enough. The sole source of our courage and strength is the Lord's presence. Our trust is to be in him unshakable, no matter how great the task may be. So, dear people of Bridgetown, do not pray for easy lives. Rather, pray that you can be stronger for the Lord's sake. Do not pray for tasks equal to your power. Instead, pray for power equal to your task. Please bow with me for prayer. Almighty God, thank you for the promises that you gave in the old that also reflect in the new. Help us to see that this world is but a vapor that appears for a little while and then goes away. So let us walk wisely, not as fools, and redeem the time. Let us look to that which is forever. And now bless this body. May the light always shine as it has in the past, but even brighter now in the present and even greater in the future, because of all the promises that you have made, that you will never forsake or leave it. We ask this through Christ. Amen. In this moment, we're about to take communion. Hopefully you received a packet when you came in from off the table in the back. We ask you to take that to be with you, and people at home who are watching online, if you have your own personal things there available, please be prepared. It's an opportunity for us to share in something that is eternal but is so simple and so finite. The reason it's so powerful and finite is because God knew that something this effective would be available to every single person. I went on a mission trip once to India, and in the process, because the Indian government requires you can't be missionaries and come visit, you have to be visitors, you have to take a side trip to sightsee. So we went to sightsee the Taj Mahal. What a beautiful structure, dedicated to a love a man had for his wife. Millions of dollars were invested in all the finery there. Most people won't have a chance to see the Taj Mahal. Very few people do. But it's interesting that in an elaborate setting, you go one block away, and there's beggars asking for anything amidst all the richness of the Taj Mahal. When Jesus wanted to leave a memorial, he said, I'm going to give you the most basic of things. Simple bread and juice represent my body and my blood. But there's more power, more love, and more long-lasting essence in these simple elements than any structure that can ever be built. Knowing that, let's partake the bread that represents his body and the cup that represents his blood. And now, O Lord, thank you for the emblems that signify what the cross meant. But thank you, it doesn't end there. The tomb is empty, which makes this meal we just shared eternal. So may we take in advance the understanding we're not designed for this life, but designed for that one. We ask this through your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Let's stand together and sing.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so good to me. But I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so kind. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down. Satan fall like lightning. I saw darkness run for cover. But the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders. I have resurrection power. The miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. My praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. My test testimony. This is my testimony. Come together, sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony, from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. I'm not dead and you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. I'm not dead and you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. I'm not dead and you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. I'm not dead and you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony, from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony, from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
Let me ask you a question. What if your simple presence and attention could change the world? Last week, you may have heard me talk about how the way we as a society view teenagers was distorted by an atheist back at the turn of the last century. And even though the basis for his ideas were debunked by his contemporaries, those thoughts still infect our society. You may have heard me say that Jesus viewed adolescents very differently. He thought that teenagers, they could change the world, and he proved it. If it had not been for a group of teenagers and 20-somethings following Jesus around for a few years and continuing his work after he left, you would not be sitting in this room or watching this online as we speak. You may have heard me say that you can show students that they have community and purpose and mission and truth here and now. To share with them the good news that they are not subhuman, no matter what the world tries to sell them, but that they are sons and daughters of God. To show them that if they use their passion and energy to serve Jesus and grow the kingdom of heaven, they can literally change the world. And maybe, just maybe, that stirred something inside of you. Maybe it's because you remember what it was like for you as a teenager. Like maybe you had an adult that showed up and paid attention to you and showed you that they believed in you. Or maybe you wished you had that person. Maybe you thought someone ought to do something. Let me just say this. Maybe that someone needs to be you. Because what if your simple presence and attention could change the world? Teenagers are just like you and me. They naturally respond to people who remind them that they are human, which means they're imagers of God. And in BCSM, we do that through presence and attention. So let me encourage you to not discount your ability to show up and pay attention. If you open yourself up to this opportunity, I think you'll be surprised at how incredibly intelligent, kind, insightful, amazing, how human students can be. And I promise, even if you can't keep up with teenagers in a foot race, you can still serve them in incredible ways. Seriously, it's all about showing up and paying attention. And here's the thing. You won't be doing it alone. You will be fully trained and paired with an experienced member of our team to give you the lay of the land. You have the ability to show teenagers what Jesus thinks about them by simply showing up and paying attention. The question is, will you seize this opportunity? Here's what I want you to do. Write your name on the piece of paper that you found on your seat, and we'll talk. This is a commitment to have a conversation with me. It's not a commitment to service. So just put your name down and put it in one of the drop boxes on your way out. If you're interested, or if you have any questions, or if you just think that teenagers may have been given a raw deal by society and you think that maybe you could be a part of the solution. Because here's something that I really believe. Your presence and attention can change a teenager's life. It can change the world. you.